introduce myself. My name is Richter. I'm an editor at the German news site Spiegel Online and write about all topics concerning web, tech and media. And first of all, I would like to welcome the audience. And I know this is going to be a mixed audience tonight because some people have seen the play already and others have just arrived and didn't see the play. And so I would suggest that we don't focus on the play, but more talking about Wikileaks and Julian Assange in general. And I have 4 guests here, and I thought they might introduce themselves and tell us who they are and what their relationship is to Julian and Wikileaks. And maybe we start with Jennifer Robinson, who's a human rights lawyer and also Assange's lawyer.
Well, actually, my name is Jen Robinson. I have been on the legal team for Julian Assange and for Wikileaks since the Iraq war logs and advised them through the Iraq war logs and Cablegate and acted for Julian in the earlier stages of the extradition proceedings. I've also been involved in the observing the Bradley Manning proceedings on behalf of Wikileaks and working with the Centre for Constitutional Rights, and I remain a member of Julian's legal team.
Okay, and next one is Angela Richter, who is the director of the play that some of you just said.
Yeah, that's actually it. I mean, for the people who didn't see the play, most part of the text is based on talks that I had with Julian Assange. Turned out to be like 400 pages, so I just took a little part of it into the play, and actually every time we do the play, we change a little bit. It's a permanent work in progress. Yeah, that's actually it.
Okay, and Joseph Farrell, am I right?
Joseph Farrell. I work with Julian, I work at Wikileaks. I've been working there since June 2010, a couple of days before the Afghan war diaries. And yeah, it's the second time I've seen the play.
Where did you see it for the first time?
When it premiered in Hamburg.
Okay, and Appelbaum.
I've been doing things with Wikileaks and anonymity on the internet for a number of years, and Julian is a close and personal friend of mine.
Okay, when I just tell you when I did see the play for the first time, which was in September last year in Hamburg, and wrote an article about it, and I thought, okay, now it was September, and now we are in March, and Julian is still at the embassy in London, still living at the same place. The story is still the same start, same beginning. And so you said that you see him every other day or every day almost?
Well, most days.
Okay, so maybe you can describe your last visit, which was then yesterday, day before yesterday.
A couple of days ago. I mean, I work for him, so I go into the embassy to get instruction. We don't actually run an office from the embassy, but obviously the Ecuadorian embassy understands that he needs to carry on working, so people can go in and visit him. He's been there for 9 months. It's on the ground floor and it's down the cul-de-sac. So the embassy itself gets very little sunlight. So can you imagine being, well, he's barely had natural sunlight for 9 months. And there are various health issues which are going to start getting worse, such as his eyesight, because he doesn't get to see difference in his vistas, and also everything's very close up. So you've got, most people get to see down the street. He can't see down the street. But in spite of all that, he carries on working. He's never depressed. He's, the term is overused when everyone says he's in good spirits, but he is.
Now what about his health? Because we had a news article that he was really sick, and if he would have to go to hospital or see a doctor, what would happen?
Well, that is referred to as lung gate, and I think the press might have made more out of it than it actually was.
Okay, but you said that he's not so good, so...
Well, no, the sight will be an issue, and also somebody who doesn't get to walk lots. There are lots of medical conditions that arise from people who are kept in confined spaces. People in prison, even they get to go out and walk around outside.
But does he see a doctor sometime, or somebody's trying to help work out or whatever?
the embassy looks after them.
Okay, great. And now we know that he's running for Senate in Australia. Jennifer, maybe you can tell us something about him and how his chances are.
He has announced that he's running for the Senate in Australia from the Ecuadorian embassy, and a Wikileaks party has been formed. The Australian
how many members does the Wikileaks party have?
I think you need to have 500 in order to be registered as a party, so they've got at least 500. But they're polling incredibly well. I think the last poll was something like 27%, higher than one of the major parties.
27% of the voting intention. That was an independent poll, it wasn't the poll the Wikileaks party did.
And but just in case this does not work out, so when would be the chance for him to leave this building, this room?
Well, if he is elected, he will have others who will run on the party ticket with him, and somebody else will take the seat if he's unable to take it. He's unable to leave the embassy at the moment because he's liable to arrest if he should leave because of the outstanding arrest warrant with respect to Sweden. So unless and until it's now in the political realm, he has sought asylum from Ecuador, was granted asylum on the basis of his fear of persecution should he return to the United States. Now that that has been granted, Ecuador has an international obligation to protect him from that risk, and unless and until assurances can be given that he won't be sent onward from Sweden to the US, they will not allow him to go back there, and that is their international obligation. So now it's a matter for negotiation between Sweden, Ecuador, and the United Kingdom.
But how realistic is that to get a year like that?
It's completely within the realm of politics.
How long would you think? What are you counting in years, in months, and decades?
I think the Ecuadorian government recently said that they're hoping for a resolution by the end of the year, but we have no idea in terms of time frame. And Julian's certainly committed to doing what it is he needs to continue to operate Wikileaks.
Okay, but he can stay there as long as he wants to.
Yes.
Sometimes when we write articles and saying about him being at the embassy, holding a speech, running for Senate, being sick, whatever, the people I see that our readers are commenting, the Spiegel Online readers love to post comments on our articles, and there's always a lot of supporters, but there are a lot of people also saying, no, he does not have to be trapped. He should go to Sweden. There is no extradition request yet from the US. Nothing will happen. If they wanted him, they could have him already. And Sweden wouldn't extradite him if there's a threat to his life. So if he was facing death penalty, they wouldn't extradite him. What do you then say? Maybe Jake or you, who's best to answer?
Well, the first thing is that he is the subject of a grand jury, which is by its nature secret. So it may well be that there is a secret indictment already in existence. We won't know that that exists until it's unsealed, and that's at the point that they will request his extradition. The US ambassador to London in December 2010 said that they would wait to see what happened in Sweden. So the fact that people say, well, they could have got him by now, we don't know that there's an arrest warrant, completely ignores the objectively available facts. We know there's a grand jury. We know that he is the subject of it. We know from the Bradley Manning proceedings that, as Bradley Manning's own lawyer said in court, that there's a parallel investigation into Assange, and the way in which Bradley Manning has been charged and treated, in particular bringing the aiding the enemy charge, which brings potential death penalty, was specifically in order to put pressure on him to implicate Julian in the criminal investigation against him. There are more than enough facts in the public record to show that his fear of persecution is real.
And also another thing which people said, oh, he wouldn't be extradited to face the death penalty. That's not actually an issue. He's not worried about facing the death penalty. But what about life imprisonment and being tortured in an American prison?
No, absolutely. I think nobody doubts that he should avoid getting to the United States, but the reason is if there's even a possibility that death penalty, that there's a threat for his life, then there's no way that Sweden would extradite him.
But there are a number of even if they sought his extradition for, even if they could seek his extradition for a number of other crimes that don't attract the death penalty, he could be extradited for a potential life prison sentence, and that would not be prevented. It is legally possible that he would be extradited to the United States to face prosecution associated with his publishing activities. And if you were Julian Assange, would you want to face the risk of going into a supermax prison in the United States, given the way that Bradley Manning has been treated? And I think if anyone puts himself in that position, they might look at it differently and were able to see what it might be like to be in his shoes.
And this is also, sometimes you even hear, which is like saying, oh, he's a coward, why is he fearing everything? Jake, what would you answer somebody who would call Julian a coward?
So I guess I consider the source of that comment. I mean, it's usually the biggest cowards that would call Julian a coward. I mean, I've known some people in my life that are cowards. I, for example, know Adrian Lamo, and that complete piece of shit is a perfect example of what a coward does. Julian is not a coward. Julian, if anything, is brilliant. And knowing that when people say these things, they say them from a position of not knowing, not understanding, not having actually experienced what it is that he's experienced at this point. I mean, I think Julian himself said that which is presented without evidence may be dismissed without argument. And I feel like that largely applies to people that would accuse him of cowardice.
I think it's also important to recognise that he feels an obligation to his sources, and when he had those documents, he knew, and he said to me at the time, he knew that by publishing this material he was going to come under intense scrutiny, potentially face prosecution, and the rest of his life could be screwed, effectively. And he did it anyway. And I think that is brave, and it shows commitment to his sources, which is what Wikileaks is all about.
I think that it goes beyond this as well, because he's very aware that, imagine this weren't the case, let's say he was a free man, that no matter where he published, the places in the world that he could travel would depend on which countries he was publishing about. He had an analogy, which I think he told Angela, about the world being a chessboard of light and dark places, the light places where he can travel and the dark places where he's currently publishing about.
I wanted to say maybe we save the questions and do it afterwards. Because then you have a microphone and so we can all hear.
I just want to say also to this topic, I mean, it's not only about the death penalty, like you said, it's also being imprisoned in America, which he's not the only one. There are people to whom that already happened. Not only Bradley Manning, but Jeremy Hammond and so on. And also things happened which are not supposed to happen in a free Western world. People were abducted by the CIA and schlepped to dungeons in Europe, in Romania and so on, in Kuwait. And I mean, these things are not supposed to happen, but they did happen. So, you know. If I was in his shoes, I would just do the same. I must admit, I wouldn't take the risk.
But when we are now talking about his critics, there are also a lot of people who say there are allegations in Sweden, and he should like really, so that everybody knows, like being questions, that everybody knows what really happened. If there is something, if it's just conspiracy, what happened, and they, especially Germany, just had like a huge discussion about feminism and anti-sexism, and they said, okay, it can't be that somebody's getting away with it just because there are other issues. There are two women who have rights too, and have the right to be heard in court, and to make their points clear, and not being hunted on the internet with like taking their pictures and everything, and it's like witch hunt. So what would you say, Jennifer?
Well, I think all of the points that you've raised, the blame for that is put on Julian, and I think that's really unfair. He remained in Sweden to answer the allegations. He was interviewed once. He offered his testimony since leaving the country. We offered it right up before the arrest warrant was granted, by video link, by telephone. He continues to offer his testimony, and he wants to answer the allegations. He wants to clear his name, but not at the risk that once he's in prison in Sweden that he could be sent to the United States. It is within the power of the Swedish government to grant the assurances that we've sought about onward extradition, and they're choosing not to. If those assurances were given, Ecuador has an international obligation to protect him from onward extradition to the United States, and there are ways in which these allegations could be answered, and Julian has continued to offer them. There are other people and other governments making decisions that have brought us to this point. It's not Julian's fault.
I'm really wondering which way can change things.
And you're back.
Bad vibes. Thank you.
But also the fact that Sweden hasn't actually used, they haven't followed their own protocol, which was before requesting an extradition, they should do a mutual legal assistance interview.
It is provided for under Swedish law that the Swedish prosecutor can use the mutual legal assistance team to use the British police to ask the questions that they wanted to ask, or in fact travel to the UK to use those procedures. They've done it in other cases and they refused to do it in this case. We offered by numerous means that Julian could give us answers to those questions and he wants to answer them. So there are various decisions by the Swedish prosecutor and the Swedish government that have brought us to this position.
But was there a reason given why it can take place maybe in a video conference or something? It doesn't even have to be the British policeman coming in from the front yard and doing the questioning. There are multiple ways that will work out.
Like I said, we've offered by various different means, by video telephone conference, by attending the embassy, a whole raft of different means. The Swedish prosecutor has not given a reason why she won't use those mechanisms. And in fact, she says, well, I have my reasons, but I'm not going to disclose them. And I think if you want to make it look like a conspiracy, she's definitely trying to. It's a very simple matter. And in fact, I think commentators have been saying in Sweden now it's a matter of national prestige. So even though the procedure exists and even though they could use the procedure, they're choosing not to because the case has become now a matter of national prestige.
And now everybody's talking about Julian Assange, about Sweden, about Ecuador, about topics which are not directly related to Wikileaks in the first place as a topic. And when I said I'm going, oh, there will be a panel tonight about Julian Assange and Wikileaks, and I asked my friends what they wanted to ask, and a lot of them said, yeah, Wikileaks is dead as long as he's trapped. What would you say? Is Wikileaks dead right now?
Since he's gone into the embassy, we've been releasing a whole lot more of the spy files, the global intelligence files. We've released Guantanamo detainee policies. He said in his last speech, which he gave over Christmas, that he was working on something which would affect every country in the world. So consider, and we did the Syria files. All that's happened since he's gone in.
Right, so, but it's never, the people don't talk about it. It's not really like the big story. Why is it? Because the people don't look.
The people talk about what's in the press.
Right,
the press
that's what I want to say. I mean, the press is basically not reporting on anything anymore but his sex life or whatever. All these questions that you mentioned.
Why doesn't the Spiegel report about this?
We do.
Oh, move. No. Yes, I do. Yes, I have written you tweets. Why aren't you reporting? Why wasn't his statement reported?
The Syria files, I don't want to talk about it because it's it's confidential, but it's really sometimes if there is something to report, sometimes I want to talk about
the Providence video.
We are. First of all, I want to say, because I can't, this is why I'm trying to get out of this, because I can't speak here for Spiegel or Spiegel Online, because I'm just there as an editor. I cannot, every decision we make or they make, I'm not here, to say why we made which decision. I'm sorry, I wish I could, but, I'm a small lad.
Yes, I also don't want to make a scapegoat out of this situation, but what I learned while I was working on this case, because I started very skeptical, I was not a huge Julian Assange fan. I found this idea very, very genius, actually, to invent like a baby club for documents in the internet, anonymously. I find it really interesting. And I was curious and I was skeptic. But what I learned is that if we think that we have a free press in the West, I must say no. I'm sorry, that's very naive. They are just much more sophisticated. It's so so easy to say, oh, this horrible dictator Putin, you know what he did to these poor girls, and there was this big outcry, and everybody was a winner, maybe not the girls, but in Russia, Putin is considered to be very nice that he only did 3 years for them instead of 5, and in the West everybody could scream, oh my God, how horrible this is. And I find it very hypocritic when I see what happened with Assange, and actually the reporting about him is never accurate, even when and they never report about any little thing which is positive. I mean, when he got this award by Yoko Ono just a few weeks ago, I was there actually, and most of you, and nobody reported about it. Even on the gossip level, I mean, Lou Reed was there, nobody cared. But Jemima Khan was kind of pissed, and it was all over Reuters and everywhere. So, you know, for me it's frustrating, and it's not only about Assange. I could talk for hours about that now. If you look closer, you just realize they're just more sophisticated, and we are manipulated idiots. That's what it's about.
You know, in Manning's statement last week, he said that he approached the Washington Post and the New York Times before he came to Wikileaks, and he was ignored. And also, the Washington Post had the Clapper murder video for 18 months before we published it.
Absolutely. I wanted to do this later, but we can do it right now. Because the media, obviously the media, they are getting it wrong, we are writing it wrong, we are not seeing the story, and especially this case, because Bradley Manning offered the documents already to 2 newspapers, which one was like, after he gave it to Wikileaks then, sold it as the story of the decade, and before they just ignored the request. And why is that? Because Bradley Manning is a paid soldier offering something because it needs like some hero saying, hey, have a look, come over into the other room, I'll show you a video that they already have, Jake.
Because most Americans are complicit and cowardly, and that includes the journalists at the New York Times and the Washington Post. I've dealt with a number of them. I think, you know, I'm an American, and I think it's very popular to bash America, but I don't do that from this perspective of hating America. But as someone who's watched my country fall into decline, so many of the journalists were reading the war drone for the Afghan war and the Iraq war, and for the drone killings now. And it's such a shame. I mean, it's a disgrace. And so many of these journalists have personal relationships in order to gain access, that they refuse to write about the truth that would cost them their access, that would cost them their friendships and their profit centers. And many of them have money, not just in journalism, but Americans have money in the military-industrial complex. And to speak out about that is a very terrifying thing. I can't tell you the number of people that have stopped speaking to me merely because of being stopped and detained in places, just out of fear of losing their job. So those that aren't cowardly see a direct reaction, and that causes them to be silent. That's the chilling effect that comes for those that aren't cowardly, but simply don't believe that there's a possibility for change.
Okay, but since we all believe that Wikileaks is some sort of media and journalism too, so why don't the people talk about it? Everybody's saying, yeah, because the press is not reporting. Why? The stuff is open. Everybody can have a look and talk about it and read all the files. And like the journalists, nobody does. Why?
Well, I think that they do actually, and they often just don't credit Wikileaks. That's, I mean, a big part of it. I mean, a large number of the stories that have been covered in a bunch of American papers and online have been found.
Sensational. People don't care about the facts. I mean, even these 2 protocols, I put it in the play. I was thinking for a long time if I should do that, because I knew that, yeah, well, it will not be perceived well. But on the other hand, when we talk to people during the rehearsing time, they always ask, but he's a rapist. I mean, you cannot imagine what people imagine. Some people even said he's fucking children or whatever. And we said that, no, read these protocols and make up your own mind. And then when they say, how can I read them? I say, go in the internet. It's easy to find. You can just read it. They get aggressive. I mean, they get all aggressive because, no, they don't want to search for stuff. And I don't know, it's just we have to change our ways, maybe, you know, of thinking. And also, I must say, the press keeps saying, even when I gave an interview for Deutschlandradio, and they asked me a question like, oh, Wikileaks is not doing anything, it's not functioning anymore, and it's the fault of Julian Assange. And I say, why? Last week you are not well informed. Last week they released these Stratfor emails, and then they get red in the face. The editor was sweating, made like signs, and then they say, yes, but we reported on that last week. And I said, yeah, why are you talking bullshit to me then? You know, and afterwards they said to me, how can you say that we are not well informed? You know, I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke. I have a lot of respect actually for Deutschlandradio, but I was really surprised. And people keep saying it. You can really read it often, even in the Zeit. Yeah, I'm talking about very serious German newspapers, Edelfedern, and they keep saying nothing happens with Wikileaks. So you know, people believe it. Why shouldn't they?
If only that were the case, I would have a holiday.
Yeah, that's true. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be here with you guys. Angela, you didn't want to write a play about Assange in the first place. I read somewhere that you were like focusing on super nerds. I think the Taz or somebody wrote it.
Yes.
So what is a super nerd compared to a regular nerd?
Oh no, don't let me say that again. Well, a super nerd is kind of an improved version of a nerd, obviously, and has contact with
everybody has at home, yeah?
Yeah, I mean...
I'm safe.
But then the intelligence
You know, I think, your question, I think it received some part of an answer, but I think it's important to expand a little bit about American media a little bit more than we have. And that is to say, when we look at some of the things that have happened in the last couple of years, they're sort of unbelievable in some regards. And in fact, Julian and a number of other people have been, let's say, a couple of years ahead of their time. And at first, people, in fact, openly mocked all of us about our alleged paranoia, about needing anonymity, needing to protect sources by redacting metadata, and it sure turns out that later it was a good thing that those took place. And it also, during the play there was a discussion briefly with a drunk person in the audience about Aaron Schwartz.
Is he still here?
I don't know, who cares? But I think it's important just to clarify about this, right? The condition that exists in many people's minds in the United States is one where people really are on the edge of that kind of extreme behavior, because it simply seems to be the case that journalists who have a job to inform the public instead are complicit in their warmongering. They're, in fact, profiting from it. They're really not caring at all about the draconian sentences. There's a sort of joke, green's the new red and Wikileaks is the new green. And the fact of the matter is that having walked down the street with Aaron Schwartz in Boston after he was arrested, with other people that were in the Wikileaks grand jury, I can tell you that that was probably one of the most chilling walks I've ever had in my life, because not one of us could have a conversation about what was happening inside of our heads. I mean, someday I'm sure there'll be a file that's open that describes the three of us from 3 different surveillance teams' perspectives. Right? I mean, but that really starts to weigh on you. And it really starts to weigh on people who work on the legal defense teams of people in Guantanamo Bay, knowing that they don't have attorney-client privilege without being recorded, knowing that your computer can be broken into without a warrant, depending on which law enforcement agency you talk about. That creates a really serious chilling effect. And so it's so much easier for those journalists to talk about Julian's dick than it is to talk about their own complicity. And I think that that's... And I think that's what you see, actually, and that's what you hear. And it's really depressing. I mean, when we talk about women's rights, we should also consider 100,000 dead Iraqis as having rights too. Some of those were women, like the children that were shot in the collateral murder video. We should consider this, and in fact, often it is the case that people apologize for soldiers that are an aggressive invading force murdering children, or trying to, in the course of murdering journalists. And that's really...
Or the UN peacekeepers who trade food for sex with minors.
I mean, the fact of the matter is there's quite a lot of selective things that are happening here, and to blame Julian in this case, is I think you should look to those people to do that, and maybe consider what it is that they're overlooking, and take some
Yeah, you said
those
that
people to
before.
task.
You said that before when we had a talk in advance, and you said that no one remembers the name of the two shooting guys in the collateral murder video in the helicopter, but everybody knows who shot somebody, and everybody knows like if Julian's sock has a hole, or if he had a condom, if the condom split or not, or it's like really much detail. But this didn't happen by accident, you know. It's not that suddenly the police found somebody and hunted him, you know. You have to go out yourself a little bit and say, okay, it's me. I'm the one behind Wikileaks. I might be the founder. You know. Somehow it starts, and so I want to get back to the super nerd question. Is a super nerd a famous nerd? Somebody like Jake? Somebody like Julian? Somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really in charge for the definition. I think I find even. I mean, I used this term when I said I want to make a play about it because it's catchy and it explains a phenomenon. But actually, of course, it's also a little bit in the same logic that I'm criticizing. It's a little bit sensationalist. And yeah, I mean, there are certain, let's call them super nerds, people who approach activism from another angle now, and they've done it for years, but just now it's becoming very obvious, very virulent, and and some of them happen to have also some charisma, and people criticize them for that. I don't understand why people keep telling that Julian Assange seems to be narcissistic and this and that, and the same people that put him in the limelight and try to make a Jesus out of him, which he never wanted or asked for, later try to make a pariah out of him.
Because they're also
that's
the people who mostly haven't met him. Most of the articles written about him are by people who've never met him.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and also, so why do you criticize him for having the same characteristics that normally every CEO has to have, actually? Es gehört zum Anforderungsprofil to be an asshole and a narcissist today. Even the whole society is like that. So I wonder why is this a big deal in his case? I mean, I'm exaggerating now, but actually, you know what I mean? Is anybody thinking that Josef Ackermann is narcissist or big dick or something? I mean, it's everybody who's in power.
Let me ask you something. Would you have written a play about Wikileaks if it wasn't for Julian Assange? He wouldn't exist. Anonymous group, somebody, Wikileaks, who knows, cables.
I mean, that's a very theoretical question. Actually, he was the reason that I wanted to do the play about super nerds, because of, first time I realized it was the leaking of Scientology stuff. And I was interested because I'm interested in Scientology. So, yeah, he's the reason for it, and I don't have a problem with it that he's kind of charismatic, because there were also other leaking, I mean, there was Krypton before and stuff, and people criticized last time in a panel, they say, oh, why is nobody talking about that? And they say, it's always this very vain guy, but maybe you have to be a little bit also, somebody has to put his face there, and if it helps, why not? I mean, I must say, many people will maybe hate me for that.
You more the case than Bradley Manning, for example?
I mean, it's different, Bradley Manning didn't go to the press and say, I'm Wikileaks, okay, it's me. Okay, well, the thing is, should I go back? No, wait. Maybe it's me. No.
Switch off the cell phone, you just put it in flight mode. That will be the reason.
You can never switch off an iPhone, it's a lie. No, seriously, the thing is that in Bradley Manning's case, he didn't step up front the press, and I mean, the guy, I find him very brave. What he did is incredible, and it's bad luck that he confessed to this guy. What was his name again?
Adrian.
Yeah, it's so. It's a tragedy, and I wish that people would also pay more attention what is happening to him, and by the way, everybody wants to know. We have to re-educate ourselves and learn to search for stuff, because that's what the internet is also for. You can search and find stuff, you don't have to wait for the press to serve you.
But also, why do you say is one more the face than the other? If Manning is the source, if he is the source, then the source needs the publisher needs the source. It's not one or the other, they work in tandem.
Right, absolutely, I was just asking.
Okay.
Can ask everything. But did it take you to think that there always needs to be some sort of role model? Because she said you need a face. You need somebody. You need somebody who says,
it's helpful because this world is functioning like this. Maybe it's not right, but it's what happens because
so the anonymous could never work out.
I think the thing that is worth considering is that when a person or when people criticize and say there should not be a figurehead, that we should think about it in a slightly different way. And maybe the way to consider it is that at some point someone is going to be brought forth and held accountable for something. And it is in that point in which there is a lot of light on that person, there's a lot of attention. And merely because we know their name, we should not sell them down the river, because we can do things in a decentralized way. That seems to be the case when Wikileaks is basically being raked over the coals, that anyone that was in public was being raked over the coals along with Julian. Julian just happened to be one of the most public in this, and that they could have done it better anonymously, they could have done it better in all these different ways. And it's such a wanker question, and such a stupid thing to say. I mean, the Iraq War, the way that it is ending, as it ends now, comes because of Wikileaks directly leaking documents where the Prime Minister and the Iraqi Parliament have decided not to give immunity to soldiers and contractors in Iraq, which is part of the reason that troops and contractors are being pulled out. Yes, I'm sure that someone could have ended a war slightly differently. That's not, but who cares? I mean, what has actually happened? It's the same with Ellsberg during the Pentagon Papers scandal with the Vietnam War. Yes, I'm sure some anonymous people could have done some great things, and in fact, the Citizens Committee to investigate the FBI, who broke into the Media Pennsylvania office and leaked the COINTEL profiles, they in fact are, to this day, probably lucky for them, still not known. They're one of the most awesome political actions in American history to be done anonymously. That does not negate the fact that there are things that happen that are good that are not anonymous. And in fact, we need both of those things and then other things still.
And in fact, I think people presume that the reason Julian is public, the reason he explained to me his motivation is because exactly what Jake said, that somebody would be made accountable and he would prefer that that burden fell on his shoulders than anybody else's, and so he put himself forward for that reason. People presume it's because of the narcissistic, he wants to be the big figure, but when he described to me why, after many years of WikiLeaks not having any public face, he decided to do that, it's because he knew at some point somebody would have to bear the burden of it, and we're watching it happen.
But in the end, you are alone. In the end, you are the one who's responsible. And Bradley Manning, even if people are demonstrating somewhere, he's alone. What can happen out of that?
Look, we all make our choices in life, and I'm sure that some of us have made choices we would have changed a little bit if we could go back and do them again. When I think about this with Julian, and I hear people saying that he's a narcissist, he could have sold me down the river 100 different times, and he never once pushed me in front of the bus or anything like that. He's not a coward. He's brave, and he's taking this on in the way that he is because he is, in fact, a brave, courageous, good person. And it is true that he is not perfect. That, however, does not mean that he should not have the ability to be free from torture. He should be able to have a fair trial. He should be able to understand what it is that's going on. Sure, we'll get to Bradley Manning in a moment. I think it's more extreme in his case, actually. But I think, when people say these things about Julian, they just don't know. I think I'm free and walking around today because Julian is in that embassy. Right? And so when people say otherwise, I would invite them to consider that perhaps they don't know the whole story. And they can't, because we don't live in a free society where the whole story can be told openly without fear of persecution and prosecution and worse.
And as soon as you were publicly supporting WikiLeaks, how it is to be prosecuted, maybe you tell a little bit about it, how your life's gone since then?
Oh, I think, it's been, let's say, a roller coaster. Tomorrow, actually, we're filing our notice to the Fourth Circuit in the United States. Well, I suppose on Monday it's not quite Sunday yet, but on Monday we're filing our notice to the Fourth Circuit, which is basically to say that we will not be appealing the latest loss in the Fourth Circuit, which was for the USA v. Appelbaum case. Rob Gongri, who's here, I think, in the audience, as well as Brigitte Jonsdottir. The three of us, as well as others, had data about us basically taken by the US government, and we lost, and we continue to lose, and we decided that if we were to appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court, then it would create bad case law for everyone else, and we did not want to sabotage it for everyone else merely out of arrogance. And that's just the simplest stuff. For every place that received the 2703D order, which is this administrative subpoena with a bar that is lower than a search warrant, I think probably each one of them also received an exigent circumstance letter, a sealed search warrant, and maybe even a national security letter, if my read on the situation is correct. I wouldn't know that directly, but I suspect that that is the case, and I think in time we might find that out. A great example of probably the worst kinds of things that happen to people in this case in the United States right now, other than what Aaron Schwartz has gone through. My partner woke up in the middle of the night with two guys with night vision goggles watching her sleep in her own house. And we believe it was the FBI, and when we called the local police, they actually refused to file a police report for the first two times she contacted them, and only when we contacted them with the American Civil Liberties Union would they even come down, and then during this they mocked her and said that they were so good at surveillance that she would never catch them. I mean, this kind of stuff is life-destroying, right? I mean, it's when I watch The Lives of Others, just Leben des Handels, that fantastic German movie, I think, how quaint, they still use wires, right? I mean, how quaint these people understand the world that they're living in. I mean, we have some of these things now, it's just not as well understood. And the people who are railing against this, trying to make something better, trying to tell people what's actually happening, you know, those people are written off as being paranoid or crazy, or that they deserve it. When I talk about rape culture, right? So it's not a pleasant experience.
Let's speak a little bit about other people calling the people whistleblowing or whatever being paranoid, or the hackers or whoever. And because there's always a lot of people say that, yeah, they see dangers everywhere. It's in your plate, Angela. The guy running around on the beach and saying there's a shark, and there's a shark is coming. So what is the reason? Don't they explain it to the other people? Is it too hard to understand? Don't the PR, is everybody else stupid? So maybe Joseph? Jake's best?
Say Jake.
Well, most of those people aren't Muslims. Most of those people are not Muslims. If they had been, for the last 10 years, they would understand the extremely serious extrajudicial harassment, the incredibly fucked up things that the US government has done to people in Guantanamo Bay, like Omar Khadr, the very young child. I mean, if they understood this, they wouldn't say it as paranoia, because the definition of paranoia suggests that there is no reason for you to have these concerns. I mean, there's a very real persecution that is happening, and dissent is being criminalized. And in fact, Jeremy Hammond right now, sitting in a jail, and he's looking at life in prison. Can you imagine? And not European, cushy European life in prison, not 15 years then you get out, but however long you live, through whatever you face in that system, you will stay there as long as you exist.
But the penalty people are facing, or what Brett Manning is facing right now, for example, or any other person who's, that will keep the people from whistleblowing. That will make it all, nobody will, people will keep their mouth shut.
I think that's the reason for it. It's Abschreckung, how you say that.
How would you encourage them to be brave? You will be a lone leader, but you will have saved the world, so what? There should be maybe more support.
The question is, do you want to live in ignorance?
Yes, or in fear, or by yourself alone, locked in the prison.
I don't have an answer for it, but it's the question.
I mean, I think that part of the reason that I support Julian Assange and Jeremy Hammond and Brad Manning and Aaron Schwartz, and Brigitte, and a number of people who have faced either legal or extra-legal persecution, part of the reason is because we have to do that if we wish to create the world that they were trying to create when they allegedly, in some cases, took these actions. And so, yes, of course there is a culture of fear. So what it takes is other people who are not them to support them, and it takes those people also to take action in support of creating the world that they were trying to create. And, you know, we should not mistake one of the methods of transparency, to paraphrase Julian, with the goal, and the goal is justice. And so if we are so worried about being persecuted that we are willing to live in a completely unjust world, well, I don't want to live in that world, so I will make different choices. But I would encourage people to consider that. And when we have a mass movement of people that are recognizing that that is a reasonable goal, we will see people who will be brave. And in fact, we still see this on a regular basis. But it is also the case that the journalists are the gatekeepers, and they do a bad job. And I can't speak to... I can't speak to that so much here in Germany because compared to the United States, I often think in the back of my mind, oh, so easy here. I mean, it's quite funny, you know, it's easy to talk to a German journalist, especially at Der Spiegel. You can just walk into their office. Pretty much I found that that's the case, and not because I have
any more after tonight, probably.
But the point is that there's still this accessibility. So I think it's important also to fund journalistic endeavors. The Freedom of the Press Foundation, for example, is funding journalistic endeavors. I think that that's a thing where people should definitely not be afraid for having organizations like that, like Wikileaks, to actually take the time to do these things. I mean, when you fund Wikileaks, are funding exactly the thing that people are afraid will cease to exist soon.
But first of all, people might also, they need to trust a system like, any system like Wikileaks, any whistleblowing platform or something, because now they see, okay, there's somebody in prison and will probably be in prison forever, the other one is trapped somewhere in the embassy, and I don't know more people. This is pretty much what the people out there kind of think. And when we remember what went wrong with Wikileaks, this was never a technical problem or something, but only like regular human mistakes, you know, like trusting the wrong person, being betrayed, and giving passwords away, not changing them, and forgetting files and whatever. But it's like really, it's never really a technical problem. So how would we like recover that trust from the people who might have secrets and who are just too afraid to share them? Joseph.
I don't even know what the question was.
How would you...
I mean, when you say... Surely the trust is in the fact that...
Isn't the fact.
Is in the fact that what we publish has never been found to be false. That's where the trust should be. Is that what we are a publisher, and we deliver stuff that is otherwise, we're a publisher of last resort. And there are no fabricated documents. That's never been found out. That's never been, people have alleged it, but, you know, for example, all the cables and all the Iraq war logs and all the Afghan diary, not even, it's factual stuff, it's...
Absolutely, no, not the people do not trust the sources or do not trust the documents, but the people are afraid that they will also be prosecuted and that they will go to jail because they think it's unsecure to
but that's absolutely one of the ways in which WikiLeaks has been cracked down on. You know, when they started the banking blockade and these Discover, a few others who all just stopped service to WikiLeaks. It wasn't legal. The Treasury, Timothy Geithner of the Treasury in the United States even said that there was no reason to put WikiLeaks on an economic blockade. However, all these companies did it anyway. There's evidence of them being lobbied by various congressmen, and it's completely extra-legal, but it's enough to put fear into people to stop them doing it. I mean, there are other ways of donating.
Yeah, but you can still donate to the Ku Klux Klan by PayPal.
Yeah. I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's not illegal to donate to WikiLeaks, but people think it is because of the banking blockade. And that's why Jake mentioned the Freedom of the Press Foundation. It's been set up specifically so that people can donate to an organisation in the US which will give the money to Wikileaks. So even though you are not permitted by the terms of service of your credit card because they've cut off the payment systems, you can still donate to a different organisation, and it's not illegal. But I can't tell you how many people I meet who are scared to give money to Wikileaks because they think it's illegal, which is a complete...
Yeah, this is what I meant with trust. The people are scared, even scared to support.
But also, they should take refuge in the fact that, for example, the Freedom of the Press Foundation is a registered charity, it's a 501c3. There's the Farrell Foundation here, which the authorities, the tax authorities here, tried to put pressure on them, but they were successful. And in fact, they actually managed to get a precedent which made donating to the Farrell Foundation tax deductible throughout Europe. So even if you donate from another European country, you'll still get a tax break. And that as well is I don't know what the German term for it is, but it's a charity. And that protection is the trust that people should take.
And now when you think that the media and the journalists are failed constantly all over the world, so do you think that a play like this, that art can really have an impact on the, I don't know, on the public view of Wikileaks and Julian Assange?
Of course, absolutely. And I don't think that all journalists have failed. But for example, a journalist that advocates for murder is a failed human being in addition to being a failed journalist.
But there are just way fewer people who see it, isn't it? Like how many people go to a theater? How many people do read the tabloid paper?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, I didn't get that too, but Julian thinks it's an advantage that fewer people see different things. Because he thinks then they will tell other people, and everybody, little groups have different knowledge, and not all have the same knowledge. And he thinks this is good for the evolutionary development. That's why he thinks theatre is very effective. Okay. I think it is effective because we got a lot of attention. I mean, I can only speak about Germany, but actually I will very probably show the play also in London and New York and even in Australia. I just went there. And so I think people are interested in it, and I think everything counts. So, and we had a lot of discussions, and even I'm not even used to have such a huge audience in a panel after theatre, because when I did, let's say, The Cherry Orchard by Chekhov, and talked about depression, envy or something, you know. People didn't want to talk about that much, you know. So, yeah, I think it is effective. I'm even surprised by it.
Yeah.
You sort of asked another question which we didn't quite answer about people sending things to Wikileaks. Not just about money, but about documents. And I think, you know, I work on a thing, the Tor Anonymity Network, with a number of other people. If you want to help protect sources, if you wish to help anonymity to exist, you can be part of the solution with Tor, by running a Tor node, for example. But if you wish to protect yourself, you have to compartmentalize. You know, I mean, if what has been said about Bradley Manning is true, there's an important lesson there, which is that sometimes you trust people you should not trust. But that was not the publisher in this case. It was someone who was a complete stranger, who was a nationalist of the worst variety.
Sometimes it happens. When you trust somebody, you trust somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to know. You know, Daniel Ellsberg once said to me, wouldn't you go to prison for the rest of your life to stop this war? Yeah, you have to ask yourself that question. This is the question he asked people when he leaked the Pentagon Papers, who were helping him. I mean, this is a question that he and I have talked about quite a lot, so just think about that, right? In some cases, some people simply wouldn't, because they just don't care about other people that are in a situation so dire that they could step down from their podium of privilege for a moment to risk their own life.
Great time to start your questions. I thought I'd take the microphone and look if somebody, raise your hands if you want to ask somebody something.
So, thanks for being here and addressing these issues. What are your like to point out and hear your opinion on is that what we haven't gone into detail yet is with regards to what we see through Wikileaks is that it exposed a permanent constitutional crisis in that the state seems to follow law only as long as it suits their purpose, and in the event that it doesn't, then they don't give a shit about it. So I'd like to know more about this from you.
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, Europe has been here before, and I think that there's something to be said about the current state of the rule of law in the world, which is that there is a myth about the notion of the rule of law. And, you know, the United States, with its CIA rendition program, that's not a rule of law kind of thing. And with Europe helping, it's a pretty big stain on history. I think people will look back on that, as well as the Iraq and the Afghan wars, in a very negative light. And it is quite scary. And in fact, if we were to think that history repeats almost in exactly the same way, but with technological improvements, you know, the next 20 years are going to be pretty dark. I think that that's, you know, it remains to be seen if that is true. And I think we have a choice. We get to decide what it is we want to do with this world. And I think holding people to account about the rule of law and the use of the rule of law and their legitimacy, which is supposedly granted through consent, maybe we should be collecting evidence about these people. Maybe we should be showing the world what is happening, and then maybe we will be able to have a reckoning about it in a positive way. Or maybe we'll be the first or second up against the wall. I know that I would prefer to be up against the wall than to be complicit. And that's not to say that I think that people should martyr themselves. It's just to say that when you see these things that are happening, especially deaths of tens of thousands of people, that to simply stand silent is to endorse the status quo and to continue these atrocities. And so it is quite terrifying. And that is exactly the difference between a courageous person and a cowardly person. When scary things come, you still do these things, but not because you're not afraid, but because you know that it is the right thing to do.
I also think your question about the rule of law and constitutional protections in the US, the whole Wikileaks situation where you talk about the Bradley Manning proceedings and prosecution, and the banking blockade raised profound questions of the rule of law and free speech protections. Because you have banking companies, massive banks and companies, Visa, MasterCard and PayPal, cutting off Wikileaks on this basis, this is what they've said. That Wikileaks, by providing this platform, encourages sources to breach law by providing material in breach of law to Wikileaks, so they encourage the breach of law. That is precisely what all media organisations do all the time. If you go to the Wall Street Journal website, if you go to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's website, they have identical language to Wikileaks asking for confidential submissions. But if you apply the same rule consistently, then you shouldn't be allowed to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal by using your credit card. That is a rule of law question. If we think about the Bradley Manning proceedings, we have been saying from the outset that the prosecution of Bradley Manning and the way in which the prosecutor is dealing with the relationship between sources and news organisations will apply, in the case of Manning and Wikileaks, will apply in exactly the same way to other mainstream media organisations. And the media organisations, rather than sticking to the principle and protecting their own self-interest, which is to protect free speech, sought to distance themselves from Wikileaks. Somehow this is different. They're in a different category to us. We know for a fact that is not true, and that is precisely what the prosecutor and the judge came to in the Bradley Manning proceedings. So if this prosecution is successful and if Julian is ultimately indicted and Wikileaks, the people associated with Wikileaks are prosecuted, that is going to set a horrendous precedent for free speech in the United States and raises fundamental questions to the rule of law.
Jennifer can probably put this more eloquently, but also the fact that they are also now saying that if you impart some information and it gets published, then it's actually communicating with the enemy. Do you want to come in?
The prosecution's case in the Bradley Manning proceedings is frightening in terms of its scope. Basically, they're saying that if any officer gives information to anybody who will publish it online and it happens to be read in Afghanistan by Al-Qaeda operatives, then you are aiding the enemy by making that material available, which is subject to the death penalty. Now, that is a frightening precedent. a frightening precedent. But the rule of law means that it should be applied equally to all.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. I wanted to ask your opinion why Amnesty is not recognizing Bradley Manning as a prisoner of conscience.
I can tell you this because I had a long argument. They told me, somebody within the Amnesty office, that you get a prisoner of conscience, a political prisoner, and then a prisoner. And because, now, I don't know if this person knew what they were talking about or not, but because he was in pre-trial detention, he wasn't a prisoner. So, yeah, well, exactly. I thought, well, surely what happens is, as soon as your liberty is taken away, you're a prisoner. They then went on to say that what they need to do is they need to review the reasons as to why, if he is the source, why he did it. Did he do it because he was just being malicious to his superiors, or did he actually do it as an act of his conscience? And I said, I mean, this was a couple of months ago, and they said they wouldn't actually review that until he had been to court, until he had had his entire trial. And I said, well, what about all the stuff that is in the transcripts between him and Lehmer? And they said, well, you know, we need to see it once it's gone to court. And our argument, which made me very angry, but they still, over Christmas, when they were selling, or I think it was their iPhone iCandle app, had Bradley Manning's face as the first advert.
I had a second question, maybe for Jake. What do you make of this criminalizing dissent of every week they're arresting a hacker and weave and so forth?
Thank you so much for this question.
Well, it's terrifying, of course. I mean, we don't need to split it and say that they're arresting hackers. The American prison industrial complex arrests people of color every day too. And it is wrong when it happens to humans unjustly. And I mean, generally speaking, the justice system does not serve people who do not have tens of thousands of dollars for lawyers. So it is actually, in a sense, interesting because people now are speaking a bit more about this because people who previously were blessed with privilege were untouchable for these things, but now they are not blessed with that privilege. I think it is wrong when it happens to American Muslims, when it happens to non-Americans, when it happens to people in the war on some drugs. And so it is, of course, ridiculous when it happens to people even like Weave, who is probably one of the worst people I've met in my life, but even a piece of shit like him. To differentiate, still a lot better than Adrian Lehmer. Even he deserves to have a fair trial, but also he deserves to not have a trial for something so ridiculous. And
Pressure's getting higher.
Absolutely. I mean, the things, for example, that Weave has been convicted of, I mean, there are very few people who have not, in the course of using a computer, done something that is quite similar to it. So it's, of course, clear that they're using this almost like the Al Capone trick, where they need to get him for something because they don't like him, and he's an unpleasant person. So they'll get him for whatever they can, and they've decided to extend CFAA. I mean, Aaron was looking at somewhere between, you know, depending on how you count it, being a felon and some number of months and or 30 to 50 years in prison. Right, in a prison system where people are raped, that's not exactly a fantastic prospect. I can understand how people would be on edge about that, or over the edge. And it creates a chilling effect. And it creates a chilling effect not just on people's lives, but on their careers, on their friendships, on their friends' friends. And it's a really extremely miserable experience. And so we need some very serious judicial reform, and we need some legal reform. And I think some of it may come because of Aaron Schwartz's tragic death, which I think is actually extremely depressing. I hope that, for example, both we and Jeremy Hammond and a number of other people are not actually held for as long as they wish to hold them. I think, in fact, they should be set free immediately. And the same is true of Bradley Manning. And hopefully we'll see the pendulum swing back, and not just in the United States, but all over Europe, and all over the rest of the world.
Is it so in the public opinion, do you think that people are mixing up things Because they see, this is a hacker, he's went to prison, went to jail, he's somewhere else, who's anonymous, I don't know. What was the difference between Wikileaks and anonymous? You know, for somebody who's really not interested or not into the topic, that they are like being confused right now, who's like, I don't know, like the good hacker and the bad hacker, or that it's with or against us.
There was a great comment which I heard yesterday. It was the joke about white hats and black hats. Some of you have probably heard this. It's this 1950s cowboy movie analogy about ethics. Because you can so easily tell by the good guy badges people wear where they stand. And I thought it was perfectly summed up as white skin hat. Right? There's this notion that these good guys, they're always doing good things. And usually those good guys doing good things, they have white skin and you can tell that they're the good guys. And it's interesting to see that line blur, right? It's interesting because actually there are people like Aaron Schwartz who absolutely should not have been prosecuted. And they're being prosecuted in the same way as Jeremy Hammond and as we. And they should also not be having these things.
Yeah, but that helps confusing everyone else who has no idea.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the thing is that doing these things to anyone is, I think, wrong. These are draconian punishments, almost to literally draconian punishments. They're just short of being written in blood. And I think that it does confuse people. But what is a hacker? It is someone who is literate. In a modern technological society, it's literacy. What is the joy of literate people being hung by masses of people? It is people reveling in their ignorance about things. That's a shame.
The terms it's really difficult, and especially in Germany, I think there's a different view of a hacker than in the US probably, and this is something I would admit that we also, because we are using and mixing up terms for somebody who is like a cool hack or a bad hack or whatever, but we are talking about that because we know that the media there is very important to say, okay, if we call everyone a hacker, the people will be confused and nobody will differentiate anymore.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think people will look back on this era and they will see it not so differently from the way that people now look back in American history and see McCarthyism and communism. And that's, I don't know exactly who it is who will be the equivalent of McCarthy in this, but there are a lot of parallels that are quite scary, not the least of which is the repeating of the COINTELPRO style operations, counterintelligence programs where they infiltrated groups. Think about Sabu. This is the guy who infiltrated Anonymous and then, basically worked as a confidential informant as far as we understand. I mean, this is what I read in public, although Sabu actually tried to entrap me as well, which is an interesting thing. I'm glad I told him to fuck off. But it's important to look at this and see these same tactics being repeated now. So infiltration is a big one. And of course, scaring people using extra-legal methods, intimidation, things that are I've never been arrested yet. I've had my property stolen. I've had all kinds of other awful stuff taken. I've had my life changed in huge ways because of the pressures of the state. And this is not so different. And in fact, once I found that there were groups that stopped inviting people, myself included, because we were so-called WL-tainted people. And if we were invited to their events, then they would lose all of their funding because I was on a blacklist, basically. I mean, what does that sound like to you, right? To me, it sounds like history repeating. And that's a chilling effect.
Questions over there?
Hi, my name is Adam, and I'm studying film and photography, and I have a comment and a question to Jacob Appelbaum. First of all, I want to thank you and everybody involved in the work that you do on the Tor project, and I'm also was very excited and happy to see all of the faces that are possible to be here that are appear in the cyberpunk book and video. And my question is a rather practical one, because you said earlier that a couple of years ago people kept laughing at you as being paranoid and so on, and I think you're basically a lot of people are doing great work at stop people from laughing, but I found myself very often in conversations with friends that are not at all interested in that topic, saying that when I talk about like talking tools like Tor talk project or encryption and so on, saying things like, yeah, well, but what if, so what if companies and so on know, I don't know, what books I bought on Amazon, so what if Facebook keeps tracking me on all the sites and so on? And it's yeah, my question basically is, what would be your first answer to people that are not at all interested in it and that don't think that this is a trap?
Well, I mean, it's a tough question to answer because it depends entirely on the person. I mean, if you want to be silly with them, ask them to take off all their clothes. Right? And very few people will actually do that. And the reason is because when you order them to do it, they're offended, even if they might choose to do it freely, because they've lost their autonomy. And there's a very simple test for that, so you can ask them that. But you can also ask them whether or not it makes sense to plan ahead. I mean, why wear protection when you sleep with someone? Why wear a seatbelt? I mean, there are consequences to these actions. So the question is, what are the consequences to these much larger actions? For example, when we look at Deutsche Homag, the company that worked with IBM and built punch card machines for statistics, specifically census statistics in France, Holland, Germany, and a number of other places, what we see is that using just simple mathematics, you can engineer a genocide, or you can have very specific political retribution. I mean, Facebook is a pretty big punch card machine in this regard.
And if you compare it to the Stasi, the data that they were collecting back then, it's not much different than the stuff that you find on Facebook today. I mean, most of it is private stuff, you know, so you don't even need Stasi today, it's so effective.
They would have had Facebook.
Yeah, I like to call it Stasi book. I think it's an important rebranding. It's like reclaiming the word queer. I think, you know, when you look at these people and you talk to them, you can always ask them questions to really calibrate, but some people really just feel like they've lost all their agency. So part of giving people hope is to show them that there are things that we can do. And I think that if you can convey to a person that there's a concept we could call transitive risk, that is to say that because they're associated with you, they maybe will have trouble. That might change their mind, or maybe because you're working on something that is important and they are the thing that threatens your success in helping people to have medicine, or helping people to have clean water, or helping people to have the right to choose their own leaders. I think if you can show that they are actually a critical part of making positive social change, then they might change their risks, or they might change the way that they mitigate risk or reduce harm. But you can't always convince people of this. In fact, some people simply do not wish to have this responsibility. But I think you should simply have compassion for those people, because if some of these things are true, and they are true in places like Syria right now, then it will be evident. And some of those people will join you in working towards these positive social changes, and some of them will not. And it's just the same. I think that you should be kind to them, and you should try to improve these things, all while deconstructing these authoritarian power structures and not contributing to them yourself.
Another question, anyone?
It's a question to you, Jake. Since we had this discussion yesterday, it's a globalized, energized thing. There we were talking about is there like any, it was about like there are many laws in effect in Germany, for example, like the laws passed this week, the EU regulation that was to like mass surveillance in terms we never imagined before, stuff like that, and it's in every country. It's like those censorship issues we get everywhere, yeah, in the free world and stuff like that. And so when I said we already lost the war, you said it's true and it's not true at the same time. And so I would like you to rephrase it on stage, because you didn't answer me.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is, it's very easy to, I mean, the question wasn't really a question, but what Fukami was saying is that yesterday we talked about how it's so obvious that we've already lost in some places the battle for privacy, the battle for personal autonomy. We were losing our democracies in different places in the world. And it's so dire and so dark and so depressing. And I said, yeah, absolutely, that's true. But it's also at the exact same time not true. For many people, it is not actually that bad. And for some people, it is that bad. And the fact of the matter is these things swing, they change. And we have the power as people to change them, especially when we work together in solidarity. So for every person that sells Bradley Manning and Julian Assange down the river, even we or Jeremy Hammond, those people are doing the same sorts of horrible things, I think, as people who are also creating those actions in the first place to jail those people or to create them as political prisoners. And so I think we should consider that, well, in some cases it's absolutely true that we don't have privacy. We can do certain things to regain our privacy. And we don't have a choice, but we can do certain things to take it back. And some people are very successful at this right now, and some of us are not. I think Berlin is far more successful, for example, than other places that I have been recently. I would say that Germany's democracy is rich and thriving by comparison to the United States. And I know that there are Germans that, of course, laugh at that compared to what they wish it was. But you have to keep perspective about that. And I think that it is important to know that that can both be true and not true at the same time, and we should not give up hope. If we aren't working today to build the things we wish to see tomorrow, they will never arrive.
Anyone? You have to raise your hand so I can see you. No? Okay. Then I thank you very much for being here. I think it was great, and I would highly recommend everybody to not to make it a fight like it's empty, with or against us. You know, it's me, and we know about it. We know about the shark, and you don't know about the shark. So explain to your mothers and sisters and brothers and whoever what you have to explain without being arrogant or without leaving the room. And then I think we are on a good way. Thank you very much.